Welcome to Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. My name is George Ortega. This is Sunday, August 23rd, 2020 at 9:12 a.m. and this is episode number 34. Okay, we're going to continue trying to appreciate the morality involved in not just overcoming this pandemic, but preventing future ones. And this is, I'm addressing the 80 to 90% of us here in the United States, mainly, who believe in God or higher power. The arguments that I present related to factory farming especially are secular. They're naturalistic, they're scientific. But beyond that, it's the idea that if we believe that we are individually and collectively either rewarded or punished for what we do or don't do, then it seems quite reasonable to expect that because we have collectively been paying people to abuse and often torture over 70 billion farm animals every year, this pandemic is punishment for that. And what we're learning scientifically is that over these next several decades, the rate of pandemics will likely increase if we're to go by the last 2 decades, which we had more pandemics, substantially more than in the 90s and 80s and before that. So, but we're still trying to understand how it is that so many of us here in the United States, throughout the entire world, who are so good in so many other ways, take part in this system of abuse and really a horrible system of treating these animals. It's not allowed in the Bible. It's probably not allowed in other religions. How do we explain that? Back in 1992, a friend of mine reminded me of what I knew about the treatment of animals in farms. And our conversation went in such a way that at that moment, during our conversation, I decided to become vegetarian because I could no longer countenance participating in that kind of system. And for years, I thought that I was being compassionate enough, abstaining from meat and fish, and I could continue to eat dairy and eggs. So then later, I did more research and discovered that actually dairy, cows, and egg-laying hens often suffer more than the cows and hens that are raised for meat. So, so I became a vegan it's got to be about 15 years ago now, perhaps a bit over. And so the question is, again, so many of you are so good in so many ways. You work jobs, you raise families, you care about the world, you contribute to worthy causes, you have pets, you have dogs and cats. How do we understand? How do we understand our denial of this system? I mean, we can go back historically and suggest that before modern science, it may have been universally accepted that eating meat, eating a lot of meat perhaps, was absolutely necessary for human health and growth. We now know that not only is the eating of meat, dairy, and eggs not necessary to growth and development and health, but they're actually counterproductive. You know, heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the United States. The #1 cause of heart disease is meat consumption. You know, with its effect on hypertension, cholesterol, saturated fats. And so back to a theological perspective, it could be that that God waited for us to catch up with the science, you know, and really recognize the evil that we're doing by treating those animals so horribly. And God thought that we would naturally transition to becoming vegan, really. So I mean, this is, of course, just hypothetical, but it seems that God had a different way, an easier way for us. In other words, like, you know, our conception of God is that God knows everything. So God knew 20 years ago what's happening today. I mean, God is all powerful. God, in a sense, is causing it in a complete sense. So, so I don't think it's a coincidence that in 2013, we had our first demonstration of cellular agriculture in the sense of growing meat in labs. It was a demonstration of a meat patty, a hamburger patty, that was grown in a lab from cells taken from a biopsy of a cow. Now this cow for the demonstration happened to have been already dead because I think the laws in the Netherlands where the experiment was undertaken prohibit taking biopsies from live animals, I believe. But the important point is that small biopsy, you know, theoretically, you can take a few cells from a live chicken, a live cow, even the feather of a chicken, you know, and then like put it in a medium and through a technology that really developed from tissue culturing in medicine, you know, how they're able to grow tissue for grafting, et cetera, different organs. And so that's how it developed. And now we have this industry, you know, that began in 2013 when Mark Post delivered his historic presentation in London. And there are about 40 to 50 startups now racing to see who will be first to introduce these much healthier, cruelty-free, lab-grown meat products that also represent our only reasonable way of avoiding future pandemics. I say our only way because efforts to develop universal vaccines that work against most strains of virus, most kinds of virus, like coronavirus and influenza and bacterial strains of infection. These kinds of vaccines are at least 10 years, perhaps 20 or 30 years away. So basically we have a choice of continuing to support and condone this extremely cruel system that generates the conditions. You know, I've talked about this in other shows. Let me just remind you, previous episodes, that this coronavirus is zoonotic, and these pandemics, Ebola, Zika, avian flu, swine flu, they are zoonotic in that they come from animals. They come from birds or pigs or cows. There was mad cow disease some time ago. And that's why the only way we're going to be reasonably safe from future pandemics, and when I say reasonably, I'm saying at least 95% safe. That's according to an expert that I was able to access recently. And so if that's what we're facing, it's not just a matter of from a theological, moral perspective, stopping abusing, paying people to abuse and torture these animals to appease God's wrath. That's the theological. From a scientific, very naturalistic perspective, if we want any reasonable chance of staying free, and again, a wonderfully, almost virtually ideal chance, we will, again, stop farming animals, both factory farms and family farms. Here in the United States, about 99% of the farming of animals takes place in factory farms. Across the world, it's a bit different, but even here in the United States, the 1% of farming animals and family farms and all that still represents a risk that's unnecessary. And family farming is not, free from cruelty also. If you want to, these animals, they're contained, they don't live natural lives, even in the kindest of farms. And so, so we're very fortunate that we have this cellular agriculture as a means of appeasing God's wrath and of creating very essentially a pandemic-free world. Now, let's, I think I want to talk politics now. Basically, the reason why these factory farms exist is because our political system allows for major corporations, the livestock industry, the dairy industry, the egg industry, to basically set up the rules. They essentially pay our politicians. They donate huge campaign contributions, and with that, our elected officials are not representing our welfare. They're representing the needs and desires of this industry. So, considering how serious this pandemic is, we've been closed now, our society, for months. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that when this is done, we will have spent $8 trillion, and that's probably a conservative estimate. And that's just in the United States. And considering that we may be in this for the next several years, and some experts are now saying that this will move from being a pandemic to being an endemic situation, that there won't be an answer, that we may not get a vaccine. And even if we do have a vaccine, they're only sometimes, between 20 and 60% effective. And so we'll be dealing with this for years. That's what we're facing, in addition to facing the risk of other pandemics. Again, that are accelerating as we, I think partly it's because of climate change, partly it's because of increased population, increased air travel, increased deforestation. There are reasons related to our advanced civilization that tell us that these are going to be increasing. And we may get a pandemic that's much more virulent than this coronavirus. So considering all that, let's go directly to Trump. He says he cares about this country. He says he cares about the health of people in this country. Well, if he does so, then he should be encouraging the funding of this new industry. And if he refuses to do that, then you know that he doesn't care. Because again, this is our only option. And it's not just him, it's the Democrats also. The Democrats can really, have him take the lead on this, or they can lead themselves through Congress, at least through the House, so that we get political action. We've got an election coming up in less than 3 months, and I think it's an ideal time for our country to look at how we got into this pandemic and what we need to do to get out. So again, I've been advocating based on the congressional, this is such a conservative amount to invest. It may seem to many like a huge, huge investment, but I've been advocating for $50 billion immediately. Presumably because Trump does not care about people, this can only begin happening when Biden is inaugurated, God willing. But once that happens, this $50 billion should be released, within a year. We shouldn't wait, it shouldn't be over a span of 10, 15 years. It should be immediately. And the reason I say this is because it represents such a minute percentage of what this current crisis pandemic is costing us. Again, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that we'll be spending $8 trillion at least to deal with the effects of this in the United States. So this $50 billion represents only 0.5% of what we're spending on this pandemic. I think it's consummately affordable, consummately wise to make this investment. So that's what we're called upon to do. And let's return to the morality. Again, we could have been in a much worse situation. We could have been in a situation where that discovery in 2013 did not happen, where the only way we would be free of pandemics would be to all go vegan. And I'm kind of wondering if that's not actually a better option. But, knowing people the way they are, the way so many people have completely ignored the welfare of animals and just apparently, believe that they need meat, to sustain their health and growth. It seems a reasonable approach to both encourage veganism as the ideal, but also fast track this industry. At the rate of investment, there's about 40, 50 startups that are racing to basically bring the price down so that their products would be competitive, because they've already made chicken nuggets, they've made fish products, duck products. They already know how to do this in labs. It's just a matter of scaling up, to make them marketable, competitive in the meat and dairy and egg market and fish. And so at the rate of investment, there's about $1.5 billion invested in this industry right now. And at that rate, industry insiders predict that it may take 10, 15 years for us to meet the research challenges that research development, engineering, to scale up, to have these products finally emerge in supermarkets at affordable prices. We can do that, at which time we'll be basically living in dread of the next pandemic, or if we're unfortunate, as we have been recently, experience another pandemic. So between now and in 10, 15 years, it's quite reasonable that another pandemic would emerge based on, again, the last 2 decades. And so given that, if we spend, let's say, $50 billion starting, Biden would be inaugurated in January, starting in February, release those funds to the researchers, to the biologists, the engineers, the food production experts, the chemists, release those funds, and it's reasonable to expect that we could have these products on supermarket shelves in as few as 3 years. And I say this because the challenges that are faced by this industry are really not comparable to, for example, the challenge of developing a vaccine for a pandemic. And for example, for that kind of progress, the fastest a pandemic has ever gone to market was in response to the 1957 pandemic, and that took 4 years. Okay, so now, there's about 150 different companies or different, attempts at creating this virus all over the world, and billions of dollars are going into this research because of this, because of the expenditure, because of the focus. So many people working on this now. We expect to have a vaccine in as little as a year. So what would ordinarily might take 10, 15, 20 years or never happen. We still don't have a vaccine for AIDS, HIV. So what ordinarily takes so long or doesn't happen at all, we're making happen in a year, perhaps a year and a half. So if we can do that, the challenge is, again, to scale up and meet the research challenges of cellular agriculture are much easier. And so, all right, so that is, if we're wise, if we're good, we'll make this an issue. We'll make this the fundamental, the premier issue of this campaign. In other words, like, if Trump wants to talk about QAnon and these conspiracy theories, we can't allow that. We have to direct him. We have to direct the Republican Party. We have to direct the Democratic Party on not just ending future pandemics, but ending this pandemic. And again, going back to the theology, if this pandemic is punishment for our continuing to pay people to abuse and torture over 70 billion land animals each year, then we may need to transition to end farming animals, family and factory farming, in order to for God to forgive us for this, by lifting this pandemic. It's not certain that we'll find a vaccine. I've heard reports that we're expected to go in and out of shutdowns, lockdowns, openings, back and forth for 2, 3, 4 years. So again, it's not just about developing a technology, fast-tracking a technology that can keep us as safe as we can possibly be, and very probably as safe as we need to be for future pandemics. This may be about actually, again, in a theological sense, appeasing God, showing ourselves worthy of this reprieve, this forgiveness. So again, that's what you can do. Don't allow Trump, don't allow the politicians to distract us with voter fraud and postal conspiracies, and again, they're just, it's evil what they're doing. They're not paying attention to the pandemic. Trump continues to refuse to fund the fight sufficiently. We still don't have enough masks and tests. And we're not investing nearly as much as we should be in addressing this, the economic impacts, you know. So, so again, let's take this challenge upon ourselves. We have an election coming up. The country is paying attention. The world is paying attention, because this industry is not just limited to the United States. Basically, this will have to be a Manhattan Project involving the entire world. That not only do we here in the United States have to end the farming of animals, we have to gain the agreement of every country in the world to do the same. And that is a monumental task, but it's a necessary task. We don't have a reasonable alternative. So, so let's take the opportunity of this election to hold Trump's feet to the fire on this. Let's not tolerate his diverting our attention with often baseless conspiracy. I mean, he actually, you know, has touted the belief that this coronavirus is a hoax, and you know, for months he did that. I don't know if he's on board. I mean, so you know, we cannot, as good people, if we want to earn our forgiveness, if we want to have a world that's safe for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren from these pandemics that will otherwise basically wreak havoc on our civilization, we need to act. And so it's a perfect time to act this election. If you know of a politician, talk to him about this. You know, explain to them the importance of our doing this. Okay, so we've got about a minute left. Watch this every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. on White Plains Community Media, channel 76 if you get Optimum, 45 if you get Verizon. This show is also now in an audio version on Spotify and iTunes and several other podcast deliverers. And again, this is episode number 34. We'll continue going over this until you understand this well enough and understand the urgency and the absolute necessity of transitioning from farming animals to the cellular agriculture, and, you know, ideally, or going vegan, you know, because I think many more of us will choose to go vegan. All right, well, I hope you're having a great Monday, and God willing, I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.